Okay, could we please have you, someone else help her and get to these other tables as well? All right, I would appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to talk about, obviously, this is a long title, and I'm going to go through this stuff very quickly. I'm passing out the complete set of slides, and I'm not sure there's enough for everyone, but this will at least give you some reference to look at. Basically what I'm going to talk about, as it says in the title, is transplanted villages or transformation. And the real issue is rural-urban migration, but it's more involved than that. Am I going to, let's see, there must be an arrow here, there's an arrow. Okay, so just to go through, I'm not going to, one of the points is how urban is urban, what are we talking about? There is a table here, it'll be in the handout, you can have a look at it if you want. But clearly there are different levels of urbanization. Some places are as high as 70%. Africa is, however, the least urban, although growing very rapidly. North Africa is, by comparison, highly urban, 50%. And urbanization is increasing, especially in the less urban places. And West Africa is especially noteworthy, 21 percent point change in 20 years. So that's basically going from, let's say, 30% to 50% or something of that sort. So urbanization, what we know, as we've seen, is a real thing. One of the things that surprised me is just in looking at comparing the U.S. and Africa, that actually there's actually in Africa 18 urban areas that are greater than 3 million, whereas in the United States, and these are metropolitan areas, these are not urban areas per se, we only have 14 greater than 3 million. And you can see some countries, Egypt, Nigeria, and in particular in South Africa, that have more than one metropolitan area greater than 3 million. This is simply to say, this is what I call the colonial curse. I'm not going to go through this, but the sort of conundrum is that you start with low urbanization, you have big rural urban movements, you have big metros, and the big get bigger. And the colonial curse is, of course, that the development by the colonial powers was on the coast, not on the inland. They totally, I don't say totally ignored, but for the most part ignored the existing urban structure that was there before. This is something called the ideal typical sequence of transport development, which as a graduate student I thought, oh, that's really how it happens. But of course it's an artifact of colonialism, as is much of today's world today. This is just simply, I was going to go through this, but I'm not going to worry about it. And of course, in the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, the colonial powers got together and drew the boundaries, irrespective of language and sort of local control and city form and that sort of thing. So we have an Africa today which is really not representative of the underlying social, ethnic, traditional, urban, etc. structure. And that makes a problem. So, for example, one of the things is that we have thick, less penetrable borders. So here's a map that shows how thick the borders are. You can see that all these borders in Africa are very thick compared to other places. You also have more nations than elsewhere that are at the bottom of the accessibility scale. This is a map of accessibility. You can see, looking at Africa compared to the rest of the world. And the bottom line is that you have low integration among countries. And I've heard people I know who are active in African politics who would say that's a major, major, major problem with Africa, with developing Africa, is getting African cities to and countries to interact with other African cities and countries. And here, for example, is a ports. You can see that they're all on the coast. That means orientation outside. And if you look at these road structures or railroads, most of them stop at the national line, okay? So it's really internal circulation, internal transportation, so that every, they say, every man is an island. In Africa, every country is an island. Maybe that's a generalization, it's too much, but something like that. And by comparison, look at the United States, if I can get this thing to work. This is the road network, the national highway system in the United States. You can see, and this is not to say that the United States is better or worse or anything else. It's simply this is a heritage of colonialism. And this is what, if you're dealing with urban planning today, that's what you need to deal with. If you're planning, if you're dealing with development today, that's what you have to deal with. So we have isolation of countries, we have low levels of trade. Here you can see, these are the trade routes. You can see how thick the trade routes are across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, how thin the trade routes are around Latin America, Africa, etc. So that on the world stage, you have low levels of trade, and this trade is commodity heavy. And so these are just the main things that are exported. These are, of course, primary materials, and the main things that are imported are machinery, manufactured. It's the old sort of value-added kind of argument. There isn't anything new here, but I think the context is very important. And also, but in fact, the colonial curse, so-called, is now past tense. What is the present? Okay, so we have low levels of urbanization in terms of Africa as a whole, and what's happening in rural areas. Well, this is actually in some ways causing a problem itself, because the two major movements in rural areas is the Green Revolution, and I'm going to show you some things, which is being very highly hyped in terms of increasing productivity, apparently, as I read it, okay, and industrial farming, which means that there's displacement of people and migration to the city. What did it say, 5 or 1? Someone held up a sign. I don't know, anyway. So, here's Green Revolution technologies, and I just listed them here. They're listed on your handout in industrial agriculture, some photographs to show what these things look like. These are some advertisements, the Alliance for Green Revolution. Well, this is all very nice, but this is all leading to more urbanization. This is leading to people not being able to be able to be those farmers that can afford the Green Revolution are, of course, doing well, but is a Green Revolution finally blooming in Africa? But the Green Revolution marginalizes the poor who can't afford to take it on, and industrial farming means more productivity with less labor. So here's just some photographs of people looking at the land that was, and that sort of thing. And so here you see, for example, these yellow dots are where there is land that's been bought up, that's been devoted to factory farming. The other thing is that if we look at the source of power, note that East Africa is very, very high on human power compared to North Africa, Asia, Latin America. So where do they go? They go to the cities. Okay, so agricultural mechanization in Africa, time for action, planning investment for enhanced agricultural productivity. That's what the FAO and the UN says, but it's got consequences for urban areas, which it's sort of like agencies work. They have their own sort of level of focus. So And so the result is that people go to cities, a lot of rural urban migration, and they enter into informal labor. And here's just simply some things that talk about informal labor. But in general, for the most part, people think of informal labor as being not the path to development, although there are some exceptions. And here you can see non-agricultural employment in Africa is 78%, and that's the informal economy compared to 57% in Latin America and 45 to 85% in Africa. I guess depending upon the country. So, and this is just simply showing how the urban and the rural sort of cross. Right. So in the United States, the thing is that the United States had a lot of rural to urban migration, but that economic activity came along, and they had these ethnic enclaves, but over time these ethnic enclaves broke down, and industrial activity came along to absorb the excess labor. Whereas by contrast, it seems to me that in Africa, even in 2050, we will not have economic engine for labor absorption. People will continue to move to urban areas, and they will recreate their village, but now within the city. And I think that's an issue for when I see the planning of these satellite cities, and there's a whole issue about breaking down community ties. So I say alternative futures for the African city, which will it be? This is just a report by UNIDO, United Nations something industrial development organization. These are some quotes, but the point is there's many roads to nirvana, according to them, and this is simply a this is just laying out some of those paths. And again, if you want to look at those in detail, they're in the handout. But on the other hand, some people say, this is from CNN, could Africa be the world's next manufacturing hub? And so some people at least are talking about something very different than the scenario I've sort of set out. The Herald, I'm not sure what that is, all Africa, a new type of China, Africa strategic partnership, and there is a lot of land investment, major investment by the countries in the Middle East, by China. So these are Kuwait investments. There's major investment in rural areas, buying up apparently large chunks of rural area from China and the Middle East. And this apparently is major and widespread, such that people talk about land grabs, as they say. And that's really what I have to say. I did, Manny Geyer gave a talk in Bratislava where he talked about Africa, and I got his notes. And after I finished what I was writing, I looked at his notes out of curiosity, and he really highlights many of the factors that I've highlighted. The so-called gateway factor, which is a sort of big city by the ocean, resource cities rather than industrial cities, and they disappear. The expatriate factor, which is a kind of brain drain. The smart and well-educated go abroad, the less educated stay. Not to be personal, this is not. And the polycultural, this issue of ethnic enclaves within the city and sections of the city with low rates of inter-ethnic social economic interaction, and the dual economy factors such as manufacturing is really disincentivized, as he says, and that urban form tends to take on a kind of very what he calls organic urban growth, because there's a very much of a of a laissez-faire approach to reform, and you get premature over-urbanization where the migrants can't effectively compete for the jobs, and we get urban peripheries where we have these sort of villages within the city that function on their own, and in some sense are, this is it, in some sense are functional and have their own economy, but they're also, you know, kind of isolated. The idea of being that you have these sort of islands within the city, you can call them multi-nuclear, but he would see them as more independent, non-cooperating islands. So, as said, finally, as famously said by William Randolph Hearst regarding the U.S., quote, "Go west, young man, go west." This was in the late, I don't know when, early 1900s or something. And I would probably say, go north, young man, go north, or maybe east, or maybe west. But if you're going south, then I think you go at risk and peril, which may await you. And I say this, hoping that this is taken with humor, not seriously. That is meaningless.